Camilla's position inside the royal family has never looked more fragile than it does right now. And the reason why is something most coverage has completely missed. Because this isn't about a single scandal or a bad headline. This is about two people, Princess Anne and Prince William, quietly moving together to honor Diana in a way that leaves Camilla facing something she genuinely cannot deflect.
I wanted her to be proud of the person I would become. I didn't want her worried or her legacy to be that, William.
What triggered it? Who made the first move? And what it actually means for the woman who spent decades waiting to become Queen Consort? That's the real story. And it's bigger than anyone's admitting. 3 weeks ago, something shifted inside the British royal family in a way sources say almost nobody saw coming. Not because the move was hidden, but because the two people making it were the last anyone expected to be moving together. Princess Anne, Prince William. Think about what that pairing actually means. Anne is in her mid-70s, forged in a generation of iron royal discipline, someone who spent 50 years watching palace fires burn and never once reaching for the water. William is in his early 40s, a future king still building what his reign will look like, still publicly carrying the weight of a mother the institution never quite knew how to mourn. These two don't share a public style, they barely share a public frequency. And yet, what's developing between them isn't accidental, it's deliberate. What makes it genuinely significant isn't just the generational gap they're bridging, it's what they're bridging it over. Diana, the woman whose memory has never fully settled inside that palace. The woman whose absence still shapes the family's fault lines 30 years later. This alliance didn't emerge from nowhere. There was a specific moment, a specific date, that sources say functioned as the first public signal. July 2025. Diana's birthday. What William did that day wasn't symbolic, it was structural. And that's where this story begins. Now, July 1st, 2025 wasn't chosen casually. Sources say William's team understood exactly what that date carried. Diana's 64th birthday. And William spent it not at a memorial, not in any of the ceremonial gestures the palace typically reaches for when it needs to appear sentimental. He spent it in Sheffield, 170 miles from Windsor, inside a working conference. The event was the Homeward's second anniversary. Delivering change together, they called it. What actually happened inside that Sheffield conference room tells you far more than any statement his office released. William moved through workshops, sat in expert panels, met directly with frontline workers from 6 regions: Sheffield, Newport, Aberdeen, Northern Ireland, Bournemouth, and Lambeth. Representatives who had spent 2 years doing the actual work of making homelessness rare, brief, and unrepeated. He didn't arrive for a photo opportunity. He arrived to review progress. Ahead of the visit, William released an open letter to Homeward's 6 pilot regions, not a press release, a letter. In it, he wrote that their collective effort had already produced lasting impact. That phrasing was deliberate. Sources suggest William's communications team chooses that register carefully. And here's the part surface coverage mostly missed. Lydia Stassen, former executive director of the Institute of Global Homelessness, assessed Homewards publicly, stating the initiative was exactly where she'd expect a program at this stage to be. Foundations built, networks established, concrete outcomes emerging. That kind of external validation doesn't appear by accident. It's cultivated, quietly, over 2 years. What William built here wasn't just a charity initiative. It was something closer to an institutional inheritance, a direct line drawn from Diana's personal work to his own. But how deep does that line actually run? Because the origins of Homewards go back further than most people realize. Now, the question everyone keeps skipping past is why Homewards specifically? William has access to hundreds of causes, dozens of established royal patronages, entire infrastructure built over generations. He chose to build something new from scratch. That choice was deliberate. Sources suggest the answer runs directly back to a specific memory. Diana took a young William, primary school age, sources indicate, into homeless shelters. Not for a photo opportunity, not as a managed media moment. She wanted him to see it, to sit with it, to understand that the people inside those buildings were not abstractions. That experience never left him. And in June 2023, when William formally launched Homewards with a $3 million pledge, roughly $3.8 million spread across 6 pilot regions across the UK, he wasn't launching a charity, he was completing something she started. But here's what that $3.8 million actually represents beyond the headline figure. It wasn't donated to one central organization. It was distributed, each region deliberately receiving targeted investment to build local infrastructure. The architecture of that decision mirrors how Diana operated: granular, personal, unglamorous. Sources close to the initiative suggest that design was intentional. Williams' team wanted Homewards to feel nothing like a royal vanity project. Everything about its construction resists that reading. Now 2 years in, with independent validation from figures like Lydia Stazin confirming the foundations are genuinely holding, what William has quietly assembled is an institution that carries Diana's fingerprints without ever requiring her name on the letterhead. That is a particular kind of power, soft, deniable, and completely his own. But Homewards is only part of what William has been building, because around the same time, something else was happening, something considerably less quiet. And that is where the story stops being something considerably less quiet. Because around the same time William was quietly building Homewards into a lasting institution, he was doing something considerably more structural on the financial side. Something that sources suggest sent a very clear message to everyone inside the palace who was paying attention. In September 2022, when Charles became king, the Duchy of Cornwall passed directly to William as the new Prince of Wales. Not ceremonially. Operationally, William took control of the actual management decisions, the staffing, the financial direction, everything. That transfer is constitutional, expected. But what William did with that control is what made people sit up. Sources suggest that one of the earliest and most telling personnel decisions was the removal of Annabel Elliot from the duchy payroll. Elliot, Camilla's sister, had been connected to Charles's household arrangements for years. Her presence on those books was a very particular kind of signal about whose orbit the duchy had previously operated within. When William restructured the staffing, she was gone. Quietly, completely, without public announcement. And here is what that means. Nothing about it was accidental. A $1.2 billion estate does not quietly shuffle its payroll without someone making a deliberate decision. William made that decision. Was this William declaring war on Camilla directly? It was something more surgical than that. It was the removal of a structural dependency, a severing of the financial and personnel threads that had tied the duchy's inner workings to Charles and Camilla's personal circle. The options available to Charles were limited. He could intervene visibly, which would have created exactly the kind of public spectacle the palace cannot afford, or he could allow his son to run his own estate. He allowed it. But here is the complication nobody has fully resolved. The staffing changes are documented. The duchy is now genuinely William's. And that financial independence, combined with Homewards, means William has built two distinct institutions entirely outside Charles's gravitational pull, which raises a question about the one person who has been watching all of this unfold the longest and who has said almost nothing until now. Now, here is the thing about Anne that most people genuinely miss. She has been inside this institution longer than almost anyone alive. She watched the affairs unfold in real time, not through tabloids, not through Panorama, but from the next corridor. She was there for the divorce. She was there when Diana died in Paris in August 1997. And for 30 years after all of that, Anne maintained a discipline that bordered on the extraordinary. That restraint was not passivity. It was a deliberate institutional calculation, the kind only someone who genuinely understands how monarchy survives makes. You do not speak because speaking costs the institution more than it costs the target. But that calculation only holds as long as the institution itself remains static. And now, it isn't. What sources are now describing is a shift that makes Anne's silence newly meaningful. Because 30 years of watching everything, the Camilla years, the rehabilitation, the coronation, the slow public repositioning of a woman Diana once described as a third person inside her marriage, that accumulation does not disappear. It waits. The triggering question is simple. Why now? Why does Anne, who said nothing through all of it, appear to be moving in the same direction as William at precisely this moment? The answer is that Anne is not reacting to Camilla. She is responding to William. Specifically, to what William is building. The financial independence, the Diana-rooted institutions, the quiet severance from Charles's gravitational pull. Which brings us to the part of this story nobody has fully examined, what Camilla's position actually looks like from the inside, right now. So here is the part of this story that actually requires care, because not everything being said about Camilla right now is true. Sources suggest the darkest day. Framing circulating online has been fact-checked and debunked. Snopes and other credible outlets have explicitly challenged the claim that Camilla is being expelled, sidelined, or faces any imminent institutional collapse. That is not what the verified record shows. What the verified record shows is this. Camilla is Queen Consort. She was publicly confirmed in that role at the May 2023 coronation. Charles has given no credible signal of withdrawal. She attends official engagements. She holds the title. By every constitutional and ceremonial measure, her position is intact. And yet, that is only half the picture. Because position and standing are not the same thing. You can hold a title and still lose ground. You can stand next to the king at every public event and still feel something quietly shifting in the room. Here is what sources do suggest, carefully. The pressure on Camilla's public standing is not coming from a palace memo or a formal demotion. It is coming from something harder to document and harder to stop. It is coming from memory. Specifically, from the deliberate, sustained, institutionally backed invocation of Diana's memory, through events like Homewards, through William's open letters, through the very public anchoring of his identity to a woman Camilla has spent 20 years being contrasted against. Nothing in isolation looks like an attack. Collectively, it creates a different atmosphere entirely. The question that no palace spokesperson has cleanly answered is this: how does Camilla's legacy survive the next decade when William, who controls a $1-2 billion duchy, who just spent Diana's birthday 1 miles from home building her institutional memorial, is the one who eventually writes the history? Her title is not under threat. Her reputation is a different matter. And if you think that distinction is small, consider what the British public still believes about Diana 28 years after her death, and ask yourself which version of this story they are already choosing. That is where the real pressure lives. Not inside the palace, outside it. But here is what the palace statements cannot actually neutralize. Diana is not a fading memory in British public life. She is a live force, and the numbers say so plainly. Polling as recently as 2024 consistently shows Diana ranking among the most beloved figures in modern British history, with approval ratings that still outperform almost every living royal, including the current Queen Consort. The Kensington Memorial Garden that opened in 2021 draws hundreds of thousands of visitors annually. Sources suggest footfall has not declined in 4 years. It has held steady. What does that mean in practical terms for Camilla's standing? It means every time William makes a visible, deliberate tribute to Diana, he is not operating in a vacuum. He is activating an existing public emotional current. Sources close to palace communications quietly acknowledge that Diana's name still moves public sentiment faster than almost any other lever in the royal ecosystem. It is not manufactured nostalgia. It is genuinely structural. And William understands this completely. The Sheffield event on July 1, 2025 was not announced with fanfare specifically about Diana, but the date was chosen deliberately. Timing like that does not happen accidentally inside a palace communications operation. So here is the dynamic Camilla cannot escape. Her reputation does not require a direct attack to sustain pressure. William simply has to keep honoring his mother in ways the public already endorses. Nothing personally hostile, everything collectively atmospheric. Palace statements confirm Camilla's title. They cannot confirm what the public feels when they see William in Sheffield on Diana's birthday, choosing her legacy over proximity to the throne. That gap between official position and public emotion is where this contest is actually being fought, and the most significant moment in that contest has not happened yet. August 2027, 30 years since Diana died in that Paris tunnel. Sources across royal commentary and memorial planning circles suggest the 30th anniversary will be the largest public commemoration since the 10th. Institutions William is already connected to. Charities, homelessness organizations, cultural venues are beginning to position themselves around that timeline, and William will lead it. There is no version of August 2027 where he does not. He is Diana's eldest son, the future king, and by that point he will have spent 4 consecutive years building the most visible institutional tribute to her values that the royal family has ever sanctioned. Homewards gives him a living platform, not a wreath-laying ceremony, an ongoing movement that will have delivered measurable outcomes by then. So the question becomes obvious. Where does that leave Camilla? Her title is confirmed. Her position beside Charles is documented. But palace communications teams face a genuinely difficult ceremonial architecture problem in 2027. Because commemorating Diana on that scale, with that much public attention, means every photograph, broadcast, and official lineup becomes a statement about who belongs at the center of this family's memory. Camilla cannot lead those commemorations. She will not be placed beside William at the memorial events. The optics are simply not manageable. Sources suggest no formal exclusion will be announced. She will simply not appear in those moments. And that absence, sustained across weeks of August coverage, will say more than any palace statement ever could. Which raises the real question: what does this documented generational shift actually change? What this shift actually changes is not a coup. It is not a crisis. It is something slower, more structural, and in many ways more permanent than either of those things. William now controls a $1.2 billion institutional base and has spent 2 years quietly reshaping its staffing, priorities, and public identity around causes rooted in Diana's values. Anne has spent 30 years accumulating the one thing no title can manufacture: credibility through restraint. Together, those two assets create something the palace has not seen before: a gravitational center that does not orbit Charles and Camilla. It exists independently of them. And that independence is the change. To be precise about what this is not, it is not a challenge to Charles's reign. Sources consistently suggest William has been deliberate about maintaining institutional loyalty in public. There is no open fracture, no leaked ultimatum. The machinery of the monarchy continues to function exactly as it is designed to function. But machinery has a direction, and the direction has shifted. The Duchy of Cornwall gives William financial autonomy at a scale that means he does not need to negotiate his agenda with the senior household. Homewards gives him a public identity that is genuinely his own, traceable to Diana without requiring anyone else's permission to invoke her memory. Anne's alignment, quiet as it is, signals to the broader family structure that this is not a young man operating alone. Inside palace circles, the phrase being used is not conflict, it is succession math. Who holds influence now, how it accrues, and where it flows when the next transition arrives. Camilla's position remains formally unchanged. That part is documented and real. But formal position and actual gravitational weight are two entirely different measurements. By the second measurement, sources suggest the gap between where Camilla stands and where William and Anne now stand has grown considerably wider than it was even 18 months ago. Which leaves the one question nobody inside the palace has actually answered out loud. When William eventually becomes king, who writes Camilla's legacy? And more precisely, between Anne and Camilla, who does history ultimately judge as Diana's true successor inside this institution? And that question is the one nobody is rushing to answer, because the answer depends entirely on which version of history gets written first. William, as future king, controls that pen. Sources suggest he has already begun, quietly and deliberately, making his choices visible. The Homewards events, the open letters, the Sheffield visit on Diana's birthday, none of those are accidents. Each is a deposit into a historical record that will eventually become the official one. Camilla holds a title, but titles are formal. Legacy is something different. Legacy is what gets taught to the next generation, what gets commemorated, what earns a permanent place in the institution's memory. And William knows exactly what he is building. Between Anne and Camilla, history's judgment is not complicated. Anne never competed for Diana's place. She simply outlasted the version of the story where Diana's values could be quietly set aside. And William has made clear which values he intends to carry forward. Camilla's title is real. Her position, formally, remains intact. But the gravitational center of this institution has shifted, deliberately, durably. And the question no palace source has answered out loud is this: when William is eventually king, will Camilla's legacy be written by the institution she joined, or by the one William is already building without her? That answer is still coming. Anne and William chose service over ceremony. Diana's legacy lives. Camilla can't touch that. But the real question no one's answering yet: what happens when Charles is gone? Call it what it was: a realignment.